to get attendees in. So welcome to our Energy Rev webinar on local authorities and net zero localities to everyone that's joining. I think we'll just wait a couple of minutes for more folks to join. I think it takes usually a few minutes to get everyone up to scratch. And whilst we're waiting, please feel free to visit our website and download the white paper that we're going to be talking about today. So I'll pop a link in the chat in just a moment, but if that doesn't work, please go to energyrev.org.uk, navigate to our outputs page, and it should be very close to the top, titled Net Zero Localities, Ambition and Value in UK Local Authority Investment. So we're still getting people in as you're joining. Welcome to our Energy Rev webinar on net zero localities, ambition and value in local authority investment. We've got a fabulous lineup today, and I'm going to hand over to the team in just a moment. And they're going to be sharing insights from some really great research which has been distilled into a very succinct and interesting report, as I mentioned, on our website, energyrev.org.uk. And the work you're going to be hearing about was led by Dr. Mags Tingey and Professor Jan Webb as part of our Energy Rev work looking at business and financial practices. And this team that's headed up by Jan is working alongside about 50 or 60 academics and researchers from across 22 UK universities, and they form our Energy Rev Research Consortium. And this consortium brings together academics from a huge range of disciplines and a number of focus areas, and we're really trying to understand smart local energy systems and their role, the opportunities and challenges in delivering a prosperous net zero future. Energy Rev's part of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme, or PIFA, as you may hear it referred to today. And PIFA includes 4 large-scale demonstration projects across the country, 10 detailed design projects, and a backbone of research and innovation that's provided by Energy Rev and our counterparts in the Energy Systems Catapult. And ultimately, as I said, we're trying to understand the role for integrated cross-vector energy systems implemented at local scales and often by local actors that have the potential to deliver multiple benefits. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Polly Billington, who's going to chair our session today. And I'm sure Polly's name is familiar to many of you in her capacity as Director of UK 100. But Polly's also the chair of Energy Rev's Strategic Steering Committee, and she's a member of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution Programme Board. So I can't think of anyone better equipped to lead the discussion that we're about to have. So just before I hand over to Polly, I'm going to remind you that we are recording the webinar today. So we will make sure that you have access to it afterwards. And with that, Polly, over to you.
Thank you very much, Becky. It's lovely to be here and to introduce this, because I've known now Mags and Jan's work for some years, and this is a significant piece of work that they've just published, and really does help to reveal what is possible at local level in order to be able to meet net zero. So I hope we will all be able to hear much more about that as they outline things. Just a brief reminder, I know you're all familiar with Zoom by now, but there's just a few things that are just worthwhile thinking about. Please, first of all, we will have Jan and Mags, who will outline their research with a few slides, and then we will have responses from George Munson from Leeds City Council and from Patrick Alcorn from Bays, who are going to give us their sort of initial responses to the research that Jan and Mags will outline. Then I'll open it up to Q&A. Please remember how to use Zoom in order to be able to make the most of the functions that we've got. One is, if you think that there's something that people could, observations, comments, thoughts and so forth, please use the chat function. But if you've got a specific question, then please do use the Q&A function instead, and I will take the questions from the Q&A function as we get to that section. So if there's something specific, also target it to anybody in particular. Do you want to ask Jan? Do you want to ask Patrick? Do highlight that if you'd like to. So we'll have 15 to 20 minutes of Jan and Mags, 5 minutes each from George and Patrick, and then about 20 to 25 minutes from everybody asking their questions and then replying. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor of Sociology Jan Webb and researcher Mags Tingey to outline what their latest report on local energy systems shows us about the potential for local energy to really help us meet net zero. Jan and Mags.
Thank you, Polly.
Thanks very much, Polly. So
after some minor technical difficulties prior to everybody logging on, I'm now going to attempt to share slides. So Polly, if you can just let me know if you can see the slides, then I'll know that it's working. So can you see the main slide there? Is that
No, I
showing
can't. I
anything?
can still, I can just
see me.
I can see everybody at the moment.
Right, okay, hang on. Let me just figure out what
If you go to share screen at the bottom.
Yes, thank you.
Is that working?
Share screen. Sorry, yeah, I need to push that button first.
Yes.
Oh, it's a wonder, isn't it? You think be slightly more competent at this by now. Right.
That's great.
Is that now showing you the main slide?
Yes, we can all see it, yes.
Great, okay, brilliant. So I'm going to try and speak succinctly for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Jan. So thanks everyone for joining, and I'm just going to go through some of the main findings and recommendations from this report, and it's all geared around opening up, achieving the sort of ambition for net zero at local scale, and the contribution that local authority action can make to UK-wide targets and efforts. So off we go. So the report...
Max, can you put your slides on full screen? Because at the moment we're just seeing the notes version.
Ah, right, sorry, hang on. I'm not sharing the right screen then. Sorry, everybody. This didn't happen last time.
I think if you use slideshow, that helps.
Yeah, just, if you can
Yeah, I did move it onto slideshow and it stopped working. Hang on. Let's right, share screen. Share. I think I need to share that desktop and then. So, does it now just show you the big slide, or can you also still see the notes?
We're not seeing any slides.
You're not sharing screen.
Right. It now says I'm screen sharing.
That's much better. Yeah.
So is this the main screen? You can't see the notes and everything in the background?
Can't see the notes, just can see your slides. It's perfect.
Sorry, everyone. Right.
Fire away.
So going back to wherever we were. So this is in the context, of looking at the UK net zero target and how local authorities can contribute that. So it's obviously in the context of the climate emergencies that the majority of local authorities have now established. And also just to say, I mean, Polly mentioned this in the introduction, but this ultimately goes back to a much earlier research way back to 2013, which led into a study, which is the figure in the bottom right-hand corner, which we published in 2017, which did quite a large amount of data collection with local authorities. And then we really wanted to bring that up to date and to say, you know, quite a bit has changed since 2017. Lots hasn't changed, but lots has, including the climate emergencies and the net zero target. And obviously, in the last few months, coronavirus, which has sort of changed everything all over again. So that's the context for this work. So the rationale is really around the climate emergency piece. So we know that the majority of local authorities have declared climate emergencies, and that's looking at making their estate and operations net zero and then building that outwards to cover the whole local authority area. So this figure on the left-hand side is taken from Bristol City Council, and that just shows you the kind of local system-wide issues that it's capturing. So the climate emergency is trying to capture a whole wide range of things at local scale. We know that a number of local authorities that have declared a climate emergency, however, haven't set a decarbonisation deadline. We know that a number of them have got emerging action plans and energy plans behind them that are sometimes integrating heat power and transport on local scale. So this is a springboard for really moving that forward. But we also know that, you know, without some powers and resources, we think it's going to be unlikely that all local authorities are going to be able to secure that ambition and really move forwards with this. So I suppose really the three key things about this are the ambition is there, and climate emergencies are a clear example of that. the potential for significant emissions reduction at local scale and achieving local benefits are there, and I'll explain that in a bit, and that we think that there's a real lack of powers and resources. So we're interested in looking now at what the value of public investment is and the value of public policy to open this up more consistently at local authority scale. So those are the kind of key things: ambition, potential, but currently there's a lack of powers and resources and technical capacities. So I thought it would help to tell you the recommendations first, as that might help as we're going through the rest of the presentation. So we had 5 key recommendations. The first 3 are really trying to get at the unresolved questions about policy clarity, responsibility, resourcing and capacity. So this builds quite heavily on some earlier research we've done, and then recommendations 4 and 5 are about the kind of wider public sector role in net zero, and then the kind of wider economic recovery package, which, you know, particularly around coronavirus at the moment. So that kind of came in as we were already progressing with the research. So I'll just go through a few key recommendations and the evidence that underpins those. The only thing I think that's worth saying at this stage is we think that these are not a menu, but all key ingredients that need to be happening. So we think that these, you know, issues around all 5 of these recommendations need to be taken forward. So we'd be very interested to get kind of wider discussion and debate around this. So why a policy mandate for net zero? So we know that current action is fairly piecemeal and incremental, and there's some really great initiatives and action going on at local scale, but there's a lot of rework and redevelopment of things and a lot of shifting around in local government, which has seen a kind of major period of change over the last decade. We also know that we're a highly centralised state, and so local government in the UK is reliant on central government and public policy to open up opportunities, and that at the moment this is operating in a kind of area, you know, key uncertainties, which I don't think you know is surprising at the moment. But also just to say that there are, you know, key local capacities and key areas of local expertise around transport, around residential sectors and local business that, you know, the emissions reductions associated with these sectors have got significant local dimensions. And these are areas where local government already has established expertise. So we're saying that we think there's an opportunity for more integrated local systems, and that currently in our current organisation, we're missing on those opportunities. So we think a policy mandate for net zero carbon localities is going to be an important part of bringing that together more consistently, and really establishing coordination between local, regional and central governments, and about how the role of a more consistent policy for, you know, reducing uncertainties for the business sector and so on. So we see that as a kind of key overarching piece. The second thing to say, which builds on my earlier points at the beginning, is about a renewal of local government and regional capacities to manage the scale of change that's required for net zero. So currently, we know that energy is a discretionary activity, and that discretionary activities are being put under considerable pressure as local government is under considerable pressure. So there's a key issue here about needing to have more consistent work on net zero at local scale. And at the moment in the current organisation, that really just isn't possible to happen systematically. So what we're saying is to be able to build on the existing great examples that are already going on and really spreading that out, you know, across all local authorities and across the UK, there needs to be clearer local net zero carbon planning, powers and resourcing. So some kind of key elements that we think are important to this are that any new powers and resources obviously are democratically agreed, and that they're really developed through collaboration with local government, who are, you know, really well placed to provide some clear input around this. Key other things we think that matter about long-term resourcing and about kind of stable policy measures associated with that, and that's really about trying to establish a clear mandated and resource role for local authorities who can then plan their contribution to net zero over a clear timeline. So we think that that's a really important element for kind of, you know, scaling up and going from this more kind of ad hoc picture into a much more consistent series of local opportunities that also then, you know, opens up investment opportunities and so on. I now realise that I'm running out of time after all my faffing on trying to get the slides to work. So just to go through these fairly briefly. So what we're saying at the moment is that it's become clear that there are some issues around resourcing that are stopping local authorities from taking advantage of the opportunities that are already there. So this is really about saying we need to invest in local authority skills and expertise to bring forward investment opportunities. So this data is from the ELENA scheme, which is European Investment Bank funding, which has provided grant funding to support local energy teams in local government. So both to provide staffing costs, but also then to help provide development costs. So there's money for sort of legal fees and external consultancy support and things like that. But it provides a package of funding to fund a local energy team who then in turn are tasked with delivering a pipeline of local projects. So we looked at that as saying, well, when you've put the resource in at local scale, actually considerable investment in low carbon investment has come forward. So, you know, fund the people and forward comes the projects, I suppose is the quickest way of saying that. So we then looked at, okay, if we were thinking about how to roll out this model, what kind of investment might that achieve at local authority scale? And these teams were tasked with delivering a €20 investment in low carbon infrastructure for every €1 worth of grant aid. And they actually delivered €37 for every €1 worth of grant aid. So those teams that have been funded have kind of majorly over delivered actually. And so we're saying that there's an opportunity here to think more creatively about how this could really be spread out across local authorities, you know, into a more consistent picture ongoing. So what kinds of things might be the opportunity to work on? So this takes data from the Place-Based Climate Action Network, PCAN. This uses data looking for the city of Edinburgh. This is research led by Robert Williamson and Andy Gouldson and colleagues at Leeds, and they're working with a number of cities, including Edinburgh, as part of their climate commissions, sorry. And they've done some analysis about saying, okay, what kind of investment is needed at a city scale to deliver toward the net zero target that they're looking at. So we were trying to understand, okay, if we were going to be improving resourcing and capacity in local government, what kinds of scale and scope of projects could they be working on and contributing to, and what could local strategy be working towards? Just moving on, another way of characterizing this, we looked at some of the heat network data from Bays, and in short, did an analysis which concluded that the current pipeline which is being supported falls what we think is quite far short of what an opportunity might be if there was just one average size heat network from this existing case of project development, if there was just support to develop one average size heat network across the whole of the UK. So this is just another way of saying, what does it look like if we try to level up ambition at local scale? So I've now run out of all of my allotted time, so I'm just going to hand over to Jan now. I'll keep running the slides, but Jan should be able to just share her thoughts now for a couple of minutes. So I'll move over to the next slide, Jan.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Max. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning. So speeding on, perhaps the major missed opportunity at present in local and regional expenditure is using all of that massive investment which takes place as a matter of routine, but using it systematically towards that net zero carbon localities ambition, towards our overall UK and devolved government net zero targets. So for instance, just taking the figures for English local authority capital expenditure in recent years on roads housing, schools, public buildings, street lighting, all of that public service infrastructure. Really very significant spending year on year, something like 25.5 billion just for England, and procurement, so revenue spending 61.6 billion. If we had the kind of direction from central government that we now need, all of that could be thought of and evaluated and prioritised around net zero public investment targets, with all of the benefits that we argue in the report go along with that, for local economic regeneration, for levelling up across Britain, and for better health and welfare in all of those areas. And therefore, and we've argued this in other places as well, what we need to look at are net zero principles, bringing those to the front in all local development planning and expenditure. And also then to think about procurement, instead of looking at procurement as rather pulled back all the time to the least cost picture, thinking about procurement in terms of a whole life cost basis, thinking about the embedded carbon emissions in all of that procurement, as well as the carbon emissions in use, for example, in relation to roads and road expenditure. That really needs a change in guidance on tender specifications and the sorts of evaluation, appraisal and prioritisation that are currently used. And of course, far more systematic professional training in how to apply those principles routinely. So we're talking here about routinizing a very different set of priorities from those that are currently in place, which also sends all of the right signals, of course, to business and supply chains that this consistent investment is coming forward, in turn bringing private sector investment to the fore to match the public sector investment and multiply it up, we would hope. Again, that needs to be backed up by UK Treasury Green Book guidance, the Net Zero Carbon Review by Treasury being an opportunity for that. So next slide, please, Max. And pretty obviously, you know, we have to have that one as part of our recommendations, because we should never waste the crisis of COVID-19 and therefore redirect through our recovery strategies all investment towards that net zero carbon target, particularly thinking about the potential for localities to do far more with really quite modest public investment. So what we're calling for is a concerted focus on investment in the low carbon sectors, along with, of course, a whole series of colleagues and associated organisations, including bodies like UK 100, looking at governing all of our guarantee schemes, all of our public guarantee schemes around local scale net zero investment, thinking differently, in other words, co-investing in local funds, such as the one that we talk about in the report, the Mayor of London's Energy Efficiency Fund, making sure that they are systematically supported, those kinds of match funding at regional scale, making sure they are supported universally and systematically across the UK. We also have a section in the report that talks about community municipal investments, municipal green bonds, and crowdsourced financing, and the potential to draw on even a very small percentage, less than 1% of our UK total personal savings, household savings, to put into community municipal bonds that would support the sorts of shifts that many people are asking for at local scale. Very straightforward way to engage systematically across the public sphere with different kinds of groups and different interests to draw small element of people's personal savings into that commitment to net zero carbon. And then clearly we need to ensure that all of public borrowing is available at long-term, low-cost loans where it is in line with net zero carbon targets, including, of course, the very well established public sector borrowing availability, but also those other sources of finance out there which we're expecting to draw on as we leave the EU. Putting projects together, as we've seen, as exemplified in the local energy hubs in England, pulling all of those projects together into a wider series of programs means that they are more financially attractive, that there is potential to ensure that we can go forward with the schemes which take longer to pay back, but which are nevertheless essential, like building retrofit on a whole system basis. So last slide, I think, Mags, isn't it, pretty much?
Yep.
So just coming back to those 5 recommendations, where did we get those from? We hope that we've exemplified in a very short form, very shorthand form, I have to say, something of the background to the thinking and the evidence for those 5 recommendations. We come back to them, we try to detail them in the report and through a report. We've also tried to summarise them on that infographic, which you probably can't see well enough on the slide, but which is nevertheless there on the front piece of the report, very prominently, trying to show the value and to demonstrate through evidence that we've synthesized the value of quite modest public investment across local and regional authorities to get back really major returns to societal benefits, environmental benefits, economic benefits, and indeed UK PLC economy and economic developments. So thank you. I think that's there. We've got a thank you slide, haven't we? We'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Mags, and thank you, Jan, too. That was really, really helpful. I think it's useful for people just to be able to quickly grab those emails if you want to do a screen grab of that. But I know Becky will be making sure that these slides are shared so that everybody can have the slides. And of course, this webinar is being recorded. So if anybody needs to be able to go back, see things again, that will, of course, be very helpful. I'm now looking to bring in George Munson from Leeds City Council and then Patrick Alcorn from Bays to give their initial reflections on the work that Mags and Jan have outlined. Mags, could you unshare your screen? Oh no, there we go. We've got the people's proper titles so that rather than me just simplifying them. Patrick is the head of local energy at the Department of Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy, and George is the senior project manager for sustainable energy and air quality at Leeds City Council. So we've got initial responses from them, and then I'll open up to Q&A. George first.
Thanks, Polly, and thanks very much, Jan and Mags. I think, you know, as Leeds, we welcome this report. It's clear, it's concise, it's well argued, and I think if the key recommendations are picked up, we're going to go a long way to delivering the sorts of transformative energy reductions that we need in order to meet net zero. First, a little bit of background about Leeds. Leeds is one of many local authorities that declared a climate emergency. But where maybe we're a little different to some other areas is the level of commitment and level of resources we're putting to delivering that now. It's now one of our 3 corporate priorities, so right at the very top line of everything that we do as an organisation. It's led by our leader and our chief exec, and they've made it very, very clear to all chief officers that climate is part of their day job. And if they're not looking at how they remodel their services, they're not tackling the climate emergency. Plus, we have a team led by a chief officer of around about 30 people who were specifically tasked to deal with the climate emergency and clean air and a few other similar large issues. But it's a fairly well-resourced team to deliver on our net zero ambitions. Plus, we also benefit from the Leeds Climate Commission, which is based on the national structure led by the University of Leeds, but with strong involvement from businesses, public sector, other academics, and the third sector. And so through this, the Climate Commission, we're able to engage the city as a whole. So it's not just the City Council doing some work on climate emergency, it is the city as a whole. So when we're thinking about our climate emergency plan, we set up something called the Big Leeds Climate Conversation, which had 80 plus events over the summer and engaged with over 7,800 people who told us clearly that they wanted to see climate emergency being a priority for the city and gave us a mandate to do more than we were already doing. We've also done a lot of work through the University of Leeds to understand, quite what is it that we need to do. They concluded that around about 51% of the emissions reductions we need to achieve can be done through an economically viable investments, around about 15% through technically viable investment, and then 34% would need innovation in order to be able to be deliverable. So in conclusion, with kind of what do we need to do in Leeds, it's everything and more than we can imagine at the moment, which means that we focus all of our work now through the lens of climate change. We look at every investment we make, every exec board decision we take, and we look at the impact in terms of climate emergency as part of that. So looking at the report as a whole now, as I said before, I think it's clear and concise. There's a lot of really useful analysis in there and some great examples from up and down the country of authorities who are taking on the challenge and trying to do something different. But two areas I thought really were worth a little bit of further exploring. I've only got time to do one, but one was system thinking. So looking at how do we use systems to better achieve the carbon reductions we need to. So my example of that is, how do we use heat networks as a medium to store the overproduction of renewable energy as heat to avoid the need to then invest in additional batteries or spinning storage or whatever. So it's thinking about how you bring all those policies together to help support that sort of systems change. And then the other area that I had more experience of is around the technical assistance. We've benefited in Leeds from the Leeds City Region's ELENA project, which has helped us with some detailed, deep dive decarbonisation studies of our own buildings, and helps us with developing our district heating network. But really, we have a very strong team, which has allowed us to kind of pick up on this work. Even with a very strong team, we're ridiculously busy. When we look at other parts of the council and the way that they operate, transport planners, social services, they're busy, but we are really busy, and so it's hard to squeeze in that additional work to pick up these new projects. One of the criticisms that my director often levels at me is that there are too many schemes, there are too many acronyms, it's too confusing. And I think this is just symptomatic of the way that decarbonisation has been done nationally and locally for a number of years, where lots of short-term initiatives, lots of disparate funding bodies, it really is initiative-itis. So we spend a huge amount of time chasing the money, setting up small projects, getting those developed, getting those delivered, and then we have to start the whole cycle again and again and again. And then we have to think about the context that we're in now, that even before COVID hit, there'd been years and years of hollowing out of local authorities. So we may, in Leeds, have the capacity to manage a lot of these schemes, but there are many authorities who don't even have the staff to manage their technical advisors. They won't be able to use the assistance of something like ELENA to take a project from concept to delivery. So it's really looking at how do we plug that gap in terms of core staff in local authority, and then bring in that right level of technical support. So if I think, just trying to wrap up now, if I was to look at what I'd like government to do as a part of it, it really is to read and consider the report and think about how these recommendations can be moved forward. To look at it in terms of a long-term project, long-term strategy for delivery within the country as a whole. But then to look at what's done in other areas. In Leeds, we have something called the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme, or LPTIP, which is a 3-year, £200 million investment programme, which brings forward a range of different public transport priorities. Why not have LHIP, the Leeds Housing Investment Programme, a 3-year, £200 million programme that will bring forward investment in improving the quality of housing within the city. So focus on what we're trying to deliver: fuel poverty alleviation, carbon reductions, creating jobs, and put the investment in that we need to be able to do that.
Thank you very much, George. That was really, really interesting. And I think it lays down quite a few challenges to our next contributor, Patrick, because I think obviously a report like this being welcomed by a local authority is not particularly surprising, and particularly for the local authorities to then elaborate exactly how they would like the money to be spent. But of course, spending public money is always a challenge, and particularly in these times, and making the case for that inside government is a particular skill. Patrick, what are your thoughts on what Mags and Jan have outlined and George's response to it? You're on mute, Patrick.
Thank you. Is that better? Can you
Much
all hear
better.
me now?
Yes, that's lovely.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So I think, I mean, we are the funders of Energy Revolution and Prospering from the Energy Revolution. So, and I, along with yourself, Polly, sit on the Energy Rev Steering Group. So I was very keen to see this report and the work that went into this and many of the other things that Rebecca was talking about at the start. I think what this does is show a number of issues, and I think George has picked up on some of those very eruditely. Energy is not as simple as some of the other one name policy areas: housing, transport. When you're talking about energy, you are talking about, especially as we go forward with net zero, you're talking about heat, you're talking about power, you're talking about transport, which are three completely separate market models at the moment. And you're talking about delivering them in a very different way to the existing market. So the chasing of the money and the need to reassess and to redirect funding, I think is well recognized. But I think there is some really important parts to this that would we really want to see every local authority in the whole of the UK with expertise in all of these different parts of net zero? Do they need to have that skill set full time all the time, or can we, through things like the local energy hubs being bolstered and made bigger, share those skills, share that capacity, and put that capacity where it's needed when it's needed, but not necessarily have the sort of situation that we have, where you have a lot of people who are good at doing heat ending up doing EV charging because that's where the money is or where the projects are. And so making sure that we are matching those skills, I think, comes across really strongly. I think for us, the issues around Eleanor funding, around capacity funding, are the ones that we recognized to make the play for local energy hubs. And it's really good to see that actually evidenced for the first time. So we did that on kind of on a proof of concept approach, and this report has really put the evidence behind some of those things that we were saying, and I think that's really important. The other things I think that we would want to pick up here, really good, strong reflections on the role of community and not just on local government in the report. And I just wanted to bring that out because that hasn't been mentioned yet, around this idea of partnerships that we've seen in Orkney and in Oxford in the Super Hub, and just how that interaction then can lead you up to municipal bonds and the work that Warrington and West Berkshire have done recently. I think there's some really interesting innovation about pulling both sides of that together. And historically, and I'm sure there are people on the call with more knowledge of this, we've seen community groups act where local authorities are not, or we're seeing community groups acting in isolation from their local authorities and their local strategies, and actually this report showing how that can be really pulled together and really transformative, I think is an important part of the report as well. I think have one caution, I guess, around devolution of powers and resources, which has always been that what local government think they need to do a job and what central government think they need to do a job is usually at odds with each other. And I wonder if at a time when resources are at their lowest, having another statutory duty that is funded through those central pots is quite the right way to go. That's not a yes or a no. I think it's a real challenge, and I think that comes to my final point, which is that we've heard from Leeds, and Leeds are exceptional in the way they've restructured around this, the way that they're bringing net zero to the centre of things. Not all local government has done that. Not all local government is even talking about that. Climate emergency motions still only span about 65–70% of local authorities. It's very, very difficult to, when you look across other delivery at local authority levels, there isn't consistency of delivery. You have excellence and you have those that need more support. And I think we just need to recognize that that not all local authorities necessarily want to do this and do this in the same way. And we need to have horses for courses, ways of bringing those that are further behind up to speed, giving them the opportunities to understand those economic benefits that George and Mags and Jan have talked about, rather than just assuming that if we give them some money and tell them they've got to do it, that they will understand all of the things that cities like Leeds, with their resources and with the experience of Eleanor, have managed to evidence for themselves. So I think there is a gap. We have some really, really good places, predominantly cities at the moment, going a long, long way on this. We have some people who are just starting on that journey, and we have some people who are a long way behind. And I think we just need to make sure that while the aspiration is to get everybody to a position where this is a reality, and this report is very good at that end, it's just how do you get the people at the back to catch up and to educate those councillors, those decision makers, those chief execs, that actually the housing crisis or the crime crisis or whatever it is that is occupying their minds, the economic crisis, the high streets crisis, all of these things they see as needing fixing in the short term, and they see net zero as a long term, and they haven't made those connections, I think. And I think that's the challenge that we have now, is to find ways to build this into all of those challenges and provide a net zero city, a net zero place, alongside a resilient city, a smart city, a healthy city, a low crime city, and not have the future splintered by lovely captions and brand names.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think we've got our first question. Let me just check what I've got here. Yes. Emma Bridge from Community Energy England. Emma says she's really pleased to hear Patrick referring to the powerful role of communities in working with and supporting local authorities to achieve net zero. How does the rest of the panel see those types of partnerships progressing, and how would they go about supporting the development of private, public and community partnerships to ensure that people are put at the heart of net zero decisions? I'm going to ask George first on that, because Patrick's championed the potential of communities, and I think a local government perspective can sometimes be helpful on that. And then either Mags or Jan to come in.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Local authorities exist to serve community. So if we don't involve our communities in what we're trying to do, then we've kind of failed at fallen at the first hurdle. We're lucky in that the University of Leeds sees itself as a university within Leeds. So what they try to do, and it applies to Leeds Beckett as well, both of them try to ground their research within the city. So if they've got research that needs to be done, why not use Leeds as a case study? So that gives us a really sort of strong kind of community angle from the universities. And then there's a really strong community sector out there that we've engaged with through service delivery over a number of years. Local authorities are having being squeezed from all angles. So a lot of the time, it's more efficient to deliver a lot of our services by working with the communities rather than trying to do it in-house. So we're commissioning more and more work from community groups to deliver services across the city. Plus, we're lucky that we've had a very strong community sector that applied for the lottery funding for the Community Climate Challenge Fund. Probably the wrong name, but it's designed to bring communities together to help develop and deliver community appropriate responses to climate emergency. So yeah, I couldn't agree with Patrick more that local authorities are should be really seen as the glue, but the communities are the ones that are the areas that can drive ideas and bring resources to try to deliver climate emergency.
Mags or Jan, what are your thoughts?
Do you want to start, Mags, or do you want me to? Perhaps I'll just pitch in first and you can follow. Okay, so I would say that one route to what Patrick is suggesting, and thank you both George and Patrick for very helpful feedback. One route to that interconnectivity between local authorities and community sectors, if you like, is undoubtedly through the local climate commission kind of model, and getting people involved systematically, perhaps against their better judgment in some cases, but without, I think at present we have a very partial and uneven discussion going on. There are significant activists out there, and I would include my academic colleagues as activists in that respect. We're trying to support city councils, our own city or local authorities, to work consistently on the climate agenda. But of course, it is very uneven. So I suppose I would like to, well, I would want to see every local authority taking some of those steps to set up local climate commissions and to doing that as part of an engagement about recovery from COVID-19 and how we might manage that. Britain, on the whole, I think we don't do as much of that as some other European countries. I've had the privilege of doing some comparative research in Germany over the last few years, and to see, we studied particularly, again, as a city, we studied Hamburg. But there was a very powerful sense of communities thinking that if the government of Hamburg was not doing things in the way that they expected, then they had a responsibility to interact with that government and to debate how changes could be brought about and to develop that quite consistent long-term dialogue. And some very significant changes have taken place in Hamburg Senate as a result of that, including buying back the energy grids. Now, if we were comparing Hamburg with the city of Glasgow, for example, it's very difficult to conceive of that sort of citizens' initiative taking place in Glasgow. There are significant citizens' initiative activities in Glasgow, but they tend to centre heavily on poverty and the amelioration of poverty, not surprisingly. But we also need to be able to support people to build into that the route to poverty alleviation through improving housing, local living spaces, which is also consonant with net zero targets. So I suppose I would be a civic activist in that sense.
And I just bring in some other questions because we're getting a few more in the Q&A section. Rob Friel is asking, what else is needed to establish long-term programs developing out of local programs? I think that's an interesting opposition, actually, Rob, because I would suggest that local programs have to be long-term. Are the programs needed to enable the skills, experience and knowledge to develop? And I'll just ask another one as well at the same time, because it would be useful to get people's thoughts. Moving forward, I don't know who this is. It says anonymous attendee. Moving forward, how do you think residential and commercial consumers should be encouraged to invest in local energy resources like solar panels and air source heat pumps? What roles would local authorities play in this? Investment costs for these resources are still quite high, and government tariffs like the new smart export guarantee provide poor rates and extend the payback period to over 20 years in some cases. So that's a sort of the able to pay element. And then Andy Frew has asked, should we ensure that the ambient energy sources, such as bodies of water and aquifer, are mapped against home EPC data to know what the local potential is for large heat pumps and community heating is? Really good. I think the Energy Systems Catapult is doing quite a lot of work, Andy, on mapping the energy potential in a particular area to work out what kind of energy sources you can and should be using, because we know that particularly with heat, you're not going to have the same answer anywhere else. So I'm just going to ask you to answer those questions first. Very short answers from everybody, not politicians' answers and not academics' answers, but Newsbeat answers I'm going to ask for, and then I'm going to bring the last questions in.
Okay. Do you want me to start?
No, I'll start with Mags because she hasn't spoken, and then we'll go round again if that's okay.
Okay, yeah. So on developing long-term programs and what you need to go into them. So yes, I think a lot of the skills and expertise is already there, but it's only in some local authorities and in others it's been lost. So some of it is about building it up, but I think it's also, there's a wider point about things like, it links into what Patrick was saying about, do we need this in every local authority? What's the role of regional action like hubs and so on? And I think I would say that I think there's a minimum level of capacity that you need to have in the local authority to enable engaging with something like the hubs, which is also mega regional. It's not actually regional in England. They cover huge areas and also don't have a lot of resourcing themselves, but also opening up more opportunities for knowledge exchange and capacity building kind of between local authorities and learning from each other, you know, and not reinventing the wheel. It's learning from what Leeds have already done. And that opportunity for learning, I think, has been eroded just by, you know, stripping back the resources. You know, this massive hollowing out of local government, I think, has really prevented that from happening in any way. That's longer than you want, so I'll just stop.
That's okay. I'd like to ask George, can you answer the question about the sort of able to pay and what local authorities' role could play in helping people adopt new cleaner energy sources like solar panels and air source heat pumps, because that's really tricky, isn't it?
It's really tricky. I'm going to slightly dodge it because I think the local authority's role is as a promoter and a coordinator. But if you're going to get people to invest, then you need to have the right products available for them. And there's no point a single local authority setting up a product for its area. This should be done at a national level. So really keen and really pleased to see the Green Finance Initiative being set up with the support of big institutional investors, big banks, the right people in the finance industry who are working together to look at what sort of products could be developed for different consumers. Our role as local authorities is to work with them to feed intelligence in, and then when those products have been set up, to then help promote them to the communities.
I would add to that, Solar Together is one thing that local authorities have been doing, using their collective power to be able to get solar panels cheap that then therefore they can sell onto their communities. And also remember the power of the local authorities to develop a supply chain and a workforce, because they need to be able to improve their own assets. If you've got council homes yourself as a local authority, you should be doing this on your homes. And you know what? Then you have what they're able to pay like to call a reliable workers that they can then use for their own homes that they own themselves. Patrick, could you answer that question about mapping the ambient energy sources before I go on to the next questions that have come through?
Yes, of course. I mean, so a lot of this is around local area energy planning. The work that you mentioned with Energy Systems Catapult and Centre for Sustainable Energy, Ofgem are pushing this approach in Rio. So the reopened discussions around funding for the next 5 years for gas and power distributors. We are looking at creating a methodology that any place can take up that would allow energy data from the energy companies, buildings data, energy demand, transport data, natural resources, all of those things to be brought together, the data from those to be brought together and to create a map or a plan or whatever you want to call it that allows decisions around a whole host of things that local authorities and regional authorities make to be made with shared data rather than just the data that they currently have access to. So very often you'll find housing decisions are made with no reference to energy systems data because the local authority don't have access to it. And yet, so you're building in a place of significant constraint rather than in a place where you can get a much cheaper or a much quicker connection.
So would
those
that
sort of
would that answer Jenny
yeah.
Saunders' question as well, where she said, is Ofgem's guidance on local area energy plans being adopted, and how can BEI support the development of those plans?
So we are looking at that with Ofgem around what we would need to do to adopt that or to push forward with it. I think, and Tim's on there as well, and he's very heavily involved in that side of things at ESC. I think the issue is that we need to do get them and see how they operate rather than trying to create the perfect model in a university or in a lab. We've got to a point where we know most of what we need. What does it look like when it happens? And so Prospering from the Energy Revolution are piloting some of these with I think Coventry and Manchester as part of the detailed designs work, and we are looking to build on those and learn from it and iterate. So I'm not sure it is quite as sort of black and white as that question.
Okay, great. I'm going to put Tim's question from Energy System Catapult to Mags and Jan. Can you please comment further on your recommendation to institutionalise local net zero carbon planning and implementation through statutory powers and devolved resources? Where and with whom are the major challenges that prevent this happening? I mean, I think that I've also got a bit of anxiety about that. It goes to Patrick's point. If you're dealing with a kind of crime crisis or a social services crisis or a COVID crisis, then suddenly getting statutory powers to do something else can freak the heads of local leaders. So are we really sure that's where we want to go? Jan, Mags?
Okay, I'll start. I think that if we don't do that in the context of UK government institutions, then we won't get the serious commitment across the board. So at present, it is still a largely voluntaristic area of activity. For instance, evidence from Scotland, where there is a political debate about whether a new statutory power is needed or not over local heat and energy efficiency strategies. We know that there is political resistance, certainly, and dissent about that because of the fears that, oh, it's just going to be another damn thing on the to-do list, and we don't have scope to do that. But the point is, of course, that statutory requirement has to be backed up with resources. And interestingly, all of the officials that we've interviewed in Scotland who are piloting local heat and energy efficiency strategies have all, to a person, said, unless this is statutory, it will not be addressed because it's never going to get onto the cabinet agenda in our council. It's not important enough. And yet we're saying at the same time, oh, yes, there's a climate emergency. So
the answer to Tim's question is the resistance is everywhere to this, both from the local authorities who might want powers, but they don't want them to be statutory, and national powers, which is like, oh, if we give them statutory powers, they'll want more money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a standoff.
Suraj has got, I want Patrick to answer Caroline Bird's question last. I just want Suraj's question to come because he's pointed out that while working for a local authority, it took 3 months to access the EPC data from EST. I suppose the resources and skills are limited on the other end too, not just local authority end. And that's also, isn't it, about how much this is overall being prioritized. The importance of local energy, is it seen as important at every stage of the process? From your research, Mags, did you see other people starting to understand the importance of local authority in this process, or was there still a kind of, oh no, they're more of a hindrance than an opportunity?
Yeah, so I think that's a debate that's moving forward. But so we've, in this report, we've particularly looked at local authorities. Obviously, loads of other types of actors matter. Organizations like EST, network operators, everybody else, in their way is very important to this. But we've looked at, in this specific report, what are the kind of minimum things that local authorities are likely to need in place for there to be consistent action on net zero at local scale. Because also, you know, what Leeds is doing with their team of 30, which is great, but has also, you know, been shown actually isn't enough on its own. That still isn't enough resource to meet what's going on in Leeds. So if you're thinking about also influencing everything the organisation does, you know, this is system-wide. You know, the scale of the challenge requires system-wide change, not just in the local authority, but in all other, you know, scales and sectors. This is a big problem, and you know, that's not to say, oh, well, it sounds too hard, let's not bother. It's about to say, so what do we need to do to actually make this more feasible? And these are the kinds of things we're saying.
Patrick, Caroline Bird has pointed out, yes, some are further ahead than others, but surely the best way to achieve net zero is to place obligations and powers on local authorities and help them bring and connect resources rather than just accept that some aren't there yet. And that also sort of goes to the comment that Joanne Patterson has put, is that she totally agrees with what you're saying, that good quality evidence is needed to explain how the changes that successful places have been made is needed to convince others that the risk they need to take will make a positive difference. Well, we know that. Our membership is more than 100 strong. Some in like Leeds are well advanced, and others are really early on in this process. How much can you do to obligate, and how much do you need to do to encourage, bearing in mind you can't negotiate with the science, we've just got to get on with it?
So I think it's a very live question, Polly. I mean, my point is that in a world where local authorities don't have enough money to do all the things that they need to do and have to do, having another statutory duty and some finance, whether that is enough or not, is a different point. But that finance is not ring fenced. So the current way that local authorities are funded is they get a block fund. They don't get lots of ring fenced funding. So that would go into a central pot, and each local authority would have to make their own decisions about whether they spent that on adult social care, on new bus services, or on net zero. And some of those decisions interact in the way this report talks about and emphasizes the need for those decisions to be made as a whole. But in places where those other emergencies, and Jan's one about poverty is probably better than any of the ones I came up with, you know, those sort of things will draw that resource, and you won't necessarily see the level of activity that you would like to. And we all know that local authority after local authority, because of its funding, is delivering as much as it can, but not all of it can, against all of its statutory duties. And in some cases where they have made decisions to keep local taxation, business rates, council tax very low, that funding just doesn't exist to do all of these things. With COVID, there is a real question about what business rates, incomes look like at local authorities going forward. And I just worry that at the moment, a lot of the funding, look at the Green Homes Grant, £3 billion. Yes, you have to bid. Yes, I appreciate George's comments about the capacity needed just to get the money through the door, but it is ring fenced for retrofitting properties. It is very clearly marked. It is if that was divided by 400 plus local authorities and put into a central pot, I just worry how much of it would ever reach retrofitting homes.
That's a really good point to end on. And I think what's really interesting is it sort of makes the case for the kind of things we've been saying at UK 100 is that you might not be able to resource every single local authority to have the same set of skills everywhere, but we can share knowledge and bring together that expertise in order to be able to have a crack team that can guide people through, and again feed through to change the rules if we need to, in order to be able to make this this stuff happen further and faster. So I think this has been a really helpful conversation and gives some real interest, some real insight into what some of those challenges are. But the co-benefits are really important too. If we see net zero as something which is separate from alleviating poverty, tackling health and economic growth, then it will always go to the bottom of the pile. We know if we can actually say, we can tackle your pressing priorities now by doing climate, then you get politicians at local level to sit up and pay attention. So there's loads that is here, and whether we go with statutory powers or not. Remember, national government can't reach net zero without local government. So something is going to have to give on where those powers and obligations and responsibilities lie. I've been reminded by Becky to remind you guys all to sign up to the Energy Rev newsletter and to look at the Energy Rev website for all of the new updates. So I'm just putting in the chat the energyrev.org.uk website where you can sign up to that newsletter and get new information, see more of the kind of research that Mags and Jan are doing and their colleagues everywhere else. So thanks ever so much. We ran over slightly, but bearing in mind we had a little bit of technical at the beginning, I think we've done pretty well. And such a brilliant panel of people who really know what they're talking about, some really good insights, and I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as much as I have. Thanks ever so much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, and thanks both to commenters and chair. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.